Hi, I'm Greg Kocken, Head Special Collections Librarian and University Archivist at McIntyre Library's Special Collections and Archives Department on the UW-Eau Claire campus. I'm excited to be here virtually, presenting a little bit about how you can do the research of a house. My presentation is called House Story, and we're going to dig into all of the different tools and resources available to help you research the history of a house or another property in the Eau Claire region. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is really going to be focused a little bit on Eau Claire, but many of these same tools exist for other communities throughout Wisconsin and really throughout the United States as well. It's just a matter of being able to identify the sources of the information that can really help you to dig into these stories. I love being able to help people understand the history of a house. I think houses have really deep histories, all of the different people who have lived there, the architectural styles, how they fit with the neighborhoods that they sit within. There's so much great information about houses, and really it's beautiful to kind of unearth that story and be able to share that story, especially if it happens to be a house that you live in. I know that my wife and I used to live in the East Side Hill neighborhood in Eau Claire, and when we purchased our first home, I loved digging into the history of the people who lived there and learning as much as I could about the history of that beautiful house. So this is really a fun thing to do. And a lot of the information that you need to be able to look at is available right online. And I'm going to show you some of those resources online as we go through this presentation today. So to do this, I'm going to kind of flip between a presentation, some websites that we're going to look at. One of the great things about recording the presentation this way is that you can just hit pause and you can kind of dig a little bit into some of this on your own as you go through this presentation. I'll also add that I will make available a little bit of a handout, the house story handout, which kind of goes through some architectural styles as well as provides some links to the different resources that we'll look at during this presentation. So with that said, let me go ahead and try to get into our presentation. All right. So house story, researching the history of a house. Again, there's my contact information. I'm always available to help people dig into this type of history and other local history. So do not hesitate to contact me. I love to be able to connect with people that are looking into this history. I also want to quickly say thanks to the Eau Claire Historic Preservation Foundation, the Eau Claire Landmarks Commission, and the Chippewa Valley Museum. What I'm presenting to you here was originally based upon a presentation I delivered in 2019 at the Chippewa Valley Museum. In some ways, the ability to do this online and virtually like this provides some opportunities that really were not available when I presented this at the Chippewa Valley Museum. So a little bit about what I will discuss. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the elements of the house story and really understanding why house stories are fascinating and how many different layers we can unearth when we look into house history research like this. I will very, very briefly discuss resources covering residential architectural styles. I'll even show a website here with some basic information. But there are, of course, many great resources out there about architectural styles that we can dig into. We'll talk a little bit about some of the common styles that are present here in the Eau Claire area, and really that's much more broadly applicable to Northwest Wisconsin as well. And then we're going to dive into this step-by-step approach to house history research. This is where that handout that I provided really walks through those different steps, and you'll again be able to see that handout available on the website. So we're going to look at maps and a couple of different varieties of maps. We'll talk about the city assessor's office data that's available. We'll talk a little bit about city directories and all of the information present in city directories and how to search them. We will briefly discuss the Register of Deeds and the information that may be available there, and also a little bit about genealogical sources, newspapers, and even local history sources that might help unearth even more information, especially about the people lived in these houses and the neighborhoods that have developed in our communities over time. So I want to start this presentation by kind of talking about these elements of house history research. And I want to start by talking about a local landmark here in the Eau Claire area. You can probably see this house, and if you drive along Madison Street, you may even recognize this house. It is an 1895 Victorian cottage style house, but there is a very, very deep history to this house. Let me share a little bit of that with you. It was built in 1895 by Brady Anderson. Admittedly, we do not know too much about Brady Anderson, but we do know that Brady was a local carpenter, and you can really see the carpentry skills in building this house present just from the photograph you can see here. Some of that amazing woodwork that you see on the porch and the two-story bay window on this house. The house is most well known as the Auger House. In the early 1900s, Valdemar Auger moved his family into this house, and his family would continue to reside in the house until the early 1960s. Auger is quite a famous individual locally. He was the editor of the Norwegian language newspaper, The Reform, but also a novelist and kind of an avid individual for promoting a Norwegian American cultural identity. Now, after that, the Auger family sold it to Luther Hospital, which is today's Mayo Clinic. The Luther Hospital used it as the red carpet resale shop, notable for its red carpeting within the house. And eventually, the hospital needed to expand, and they were looking to actually tear down this house, this local landmark. And it was at that time, in the early 1990s, that a new association formed in Eau Claire, the Auger Association. With the help of the city and the help of the hospital, the house was actually uprooted, moved about a half a mile north of its original location to where it now sits along Madison Street. So when we think about this one house, there are all of these different entities that are connected to it. And really, that's the deep elements of a house story. And you may be surprised, a house that could seem ordinary may have this really deep, fascinating backstory. Case in point, when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, I was able to do a little bit of house history research then as part of a public history course. And I fondly recall digging into a craftsman-style house in Eau Claire and digging into that history. And what might have seemed like an ordinary history maybe was very telling of a bygone era. The original owner was a saloon keeper, and this was before Prohibition. But after Prohibition, the occupation of that homeowner changed to billiard hall owner. And it raises some fascinating questions about how a saloon becomes a billiard hall in Eau Claire during Prohibition. And it certainly makes you wonder what really might have been happening at that time. So again, what might seem ordinary may ultimately be absolutely fascinating. So there are lots and lots of different architectural styles of American houses. This is a really fun graphic that I discovered several years ago, and I love to be able to showcase this because this graphic, as it scrolls through the screen here, you can see a lot of these different architectural styles that have been present here in the United States over time. Many of the styles that you can see here, the Queen Anne, the Prairie, Craftsman, and Ranch, are styles that are very typical here in the Eau Claire community. But then you'll also see some of these 21st century styles, like the new traditionals at the very bottom here. All of these different styles are part of this long legacy that's tied together as styles kind of change and borrow from one another. And it's just a fascinating to be able to dig into. Honestly, talking about style of houses is a whole nother presentation and a really wonderful and interesting presentation as well. Again, that handout provides a little bit of information about that. But there are places that you can go to be able to discover architectural style resources. So some online resources that are right here. There's a fascinating short guide to residential styles from the National Association of Realtors. I'm actually going to pop over and take a look at that very quickly here, just to be able to show you that. So again, here we are at that website, and you can see the different styles: Art Deco, Bungalow, Cape Cod. You can actually click on that, click on Bungalow here, and it brings up this nice kind of visual as well as a description of style and some of the kind of hallmarks of that style, what makes it so unique and what you should look for if you're trying to identify that house by that style. You can kind of scroll through here and see some of these other different styles: bungalows, Cape Cods. Here we see colonials, all styles that are prevalent here in the Eau Claire area. All right, back to our presentation. You can also learn a little bit more about some historic properties in Eau Claire, some of those landmarks. Those additional links and that information is available here. And a lot of these online sources, you could do a simple Google or search engine search for these and find them, and probably many other guides out there online. There's also some really great print resources out there. I rely heavily on these print resources. One of them here is the Field Guide to American Houses. I sometimes refer to this as the White Bible, because when I'm digging into house history research, the details that are available within this particular book are absolutely fascinating. The photographs, the descriptions, and the minutia that's covered: windows and doors and siding and foundations and framework. It really goes into some great detail. There's also other books out there: American House Styles by John Milnes Baker, and Identifying American Architectural Styles, American Architecture by John Blumenson, another great resource that's available. So a little bit about Eau Claire's architectural styles. So thanks to data from the Eau Claire City Assessor's Office, I was able to map the styles as identified by the City Assessor's Office. And it kind of shows us a little bit of a timeline of when these styles were prevalent. So I want to go through a few of these here. So in the 1800s, early 1900s, we see this folk or vernacular style that was prevalent. Really what we see with the folk style is it's local construction companies, local builders who are using locally sourced materials in order to build these houses. And that doesn't mean that they weren't built with a particular style or a particular plan in place. But what it really is it's a reflection of the local economy and the community at that time. Then in the 19-teens into the 1920s, we see a rise in the popular bungalow style here in Eau Claire. That would then fade throughout the 1930s. And then in the 1940s, just before World War II, and if you look at that chart, you can kind of see World War II in there. You see a small rise in Cape Cod construction and then a sharp decline. And then in those immediate post-war years in the late 1940s, another steep rise in that Cape Cod style. Really, after World War II, we see the rise of a very popular and prevalent architectural style all across the United States, and one that really hasn't gone away, and that is the ranch style house. As you can see by how dominant it is here on the chart, from the 1950s into the 60s and 70s, and really beyond, it remained one of the most popular architectural styles. But there's other styles that also rose. You can see the bi-level was popular there in the mid-1970s, kind of is still hanging on there too. Split level and a few others that are also there. So let's dive into this step-by-step guide. How can you dig into and unearth the history of a local house? So we're going to talk about different sources of information. One of the sources we're going to talk about are maps. And there's a lot of different types of maps that we can be able to look into to understand houses. Some maps help us to understand the outline of a house. Some maps help us to understand the neighborhood that it fits or does not fit into with the other houses in that neighborhood. And then you may also be able to identify natural or artificial features that are present in the landscape around that house that maybe even influences the design and location of that particular house. So let's look at some common types. We're going to talk a little bit about Sanborn fire insurance maps. I absolutely love digging into Sanborn fire insurance maps. These maps are fascinating. They're also huge. Let me give you a little bit of a taste of how big these maps are. They're huge. Absolutely enormous. Just a little bit of light reading, but full of beautiful, wonderful information about the built environment of a community, about the houses in that community. And fortunately, a lot of these maps are available online, which frankly is a little bit easier to use. So let's take a look at some of these maps. We're going to go back online. This time, we're going to go over to the Wisconsin Historical Society's Maps and Atlases collection. There's a lot of different types of maps that have been digitized and made available online through the Wisconsin Historical Society. What we're looking at right here is a fire insurance map from the Sanborn Paris Map Company of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, created in July of 1895. And we're going to kind of zoom in a little bit here and just give you a taste of how this looks. I'm going to kind of scroll through here, find a page. Just going to kind of zoom in a little bit too. So you can kind of see right here that at the intersection of Superior and Mansfield in 1895, you can see that there's these different properties, and you can also see that other civic and commercial and industrial buildings are highlighted in these Sanborn maps. These maps are a really, really great way to understand how a house may have changed over time. So if you carefully compare the outline that you see here with what you know about a property today, you can understand, has this building changed from its appearance here in 1895? Now, I will add that there's a lot of different pieces of information that you can see here. You see different colors, you see a lot of different abbreviations right here. Often at the beginning of these maps, there might be some type of index that can tell you a little bit about what you're going to be looking at. I can see that here on this first page, there's a key. We'll zoom in a little bit on that. See if I can find that key here. There we are. So that key gives you all sorts of information. It says buildings colored yellow are frame, red are brick, blue are stone, gray are iron, as well as other details that are present here. So these Sanborn maps are a really great source of information for digging into the history of a house. All right, let's go back to that presentation. So for Eau Claire, there's quite a few available online from the Wisconsin Historical Society. There's even more available in print. A lot of those here through the UW Eau Claire Area Research Center, the archives on the UW Eau Claire campus. And often, if you can't visit us in person, we are happy to be able to look this up, take photographs of what we find, and be able to share that with researchers who are digging into this information. Beyond that, there's always more map options. There's plat maps. These plat maps are especially important for looking at rural communities and kind of farmers and those individuals that live outside of cities. They can often give you information about who owns a piece of land over time, where a building might have been located, how the streets and neighborhood around that building have changed over time. Bird's eye view maps, many of which are also available from the Wisconsin Historical Society. These beautiful maps can kind of give you a sense of a little bit of a 3D rendering in a way of how these buildings looked as well. You pair these bird's eye view maps with those Sanborn maps, and again, more information about these buildings and these communities starts to come alive. And then there's also topography maps, which can help you to understand that landscape and also then understand a little bit about how a house maybe fits within that landscape. So let's talk a little bit about City Assessor's Office data. Our City Assessor's Office maintains a lot of information about houses here in Eau Claire. We're going to jump over to this website here, and I'm going to share some information about what we can find and how we can search that resource. All right. So here we are within the kind of the map system of the City Assessor's Office, and you can actually search for property. I'm going to search for 1811 Main right there. There's other ways you can search for it too, but this is one of the easiest ways. I'll hit submit. And then you can kind of see the parcel numbers there down below. Click on that, highlights it here on the map for us. And then I actually want to be able to see some detailed information. I'm going to double click on that. And here you can see information about who owns that house, when it was sold, the assessed value, all sorts of information about that property is there. And then some really great stuff here. So it's a colonial, 2-story, built in 1939. And then you get this sketch right here too. So you can actually click on that. It's going to take us to this sketch. And now we have what is essentially the 2020 outline view of that particular house. You take this and you compare it with what you see in Sanborn maps. And again, you're layering all of this information together, building a story, a little bit about the architecture that you see here. And the City Assessor's Office also gives you that architectural style. In this case, it's a colonial style house. I wouldn't say they're always 100% accurate. Verifying that style from other sources can be very helpful and always worth doing as well. Okay, back to our PowerPoint. So now that we've been able to kind of uncover that information about the style and we've looked at these maps, we've pulled information from the City Assessor's Office, another thing that we want to do is we want to be able to dig into city directories. This is where we start to shift from looking at the physical structure of that house. We start thinking about that story more. Who lived inside that house? What types of families were raised here? Where did these people work? What were their occupations? Really digging into this great information. There are city directories available here in the archives at UW-Eau Claire, available at the Chippewa Valley Museum, the public library, and at other public libraries for other communities throughout our region, which provide this information. For Eau Claire, we have them from the early 1880s, really right on up to the present. I actually have them on the shelves right behind me here in the reading room. The most recent one we have is 2019, but you can see they're all right here. These city directories are amazing. Here's 1984. They provide a lot of information about the individuals that live in houses. So here we can see, I just randomly picked a page here with the bows, and you can see lots of them, but you can see all sorts of information. So Dwayne J. and Kathleen Bow, their residence is 1118 West Spruce Street in Eau Claire, and Dwayne is a salesman for Wholesome Bakeries. So a lot of information is being pulled out of just these city directories. So you can imagine how over time you find your house, your address in these city directories, and you can really uncover a lot of information. Now, early city directories didn't have a kind of a cross-reference by street. So these early city directories are a little bit more challenging. If you were trying to find a house just by flipping through, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Not very possible, frankly, not a lot of fun. Although, you know, it can be a little bit of fun thinking about what all these different people were doing and learning about our communities that way. But if you're trying to find one particular address in this book, it's going to take a very long time. Fortunately, later versions of these city directories would actually have a street-by-street listing. And that street-by-street listing would let you go and say, all right, I'm looking at the 300 block of Barstow Street North. And here it is, 308, 310, 313. And it tells you the resident or the business that's at that address. Then you can go and look them up in the other part and learn a little bit more about them that way. Fortunately, city directories from the 1880s up to 1923 for Eau Claire have actually been digitized, and they're available through Ellie Phillips Memorial Public Library. We're actually going to jump over and take a quick peek at that. So from the public library's website, and again, there's links in there, but I'm basically under Explore, and then I'm going into Chippewa Valley History, and right there we see these city directories. And then you can search them all at once. You can search a specific one that you're looking at. We'll just kind of search all at once, give you a sense of how this works. Search here for Barstow. We'll just kind of limit this to city directories right now. So no surprise that Barstow shows up in lots of these. Here's 1923s. One of the great things about this is it actually highlights that. It can be a little bit tricky understanding how they've done addresses. So this is a good example. You can see 402.5 South Barstow right here. You can kind of see how tricky that might be to find that because you know, they're using an S instead of South, and it can be picky searching. So be patient, learn a little bit about how these work. Of course, this being Barstow Street, we're seeing a lot of kind of businesses right here, jewelers, furnishings, all sorts of information right here about businesses in 1923 on Barstow Street here in Eau Claire. These city directories are wonderful. There's a little menu here at the top, kind of right in the middle of the page. And I click that little page number. That actually shows me all of the different pages that Barstow shows up on. Obviously, searching for Barstow, I had a pretty good idea that it was going to be all over the place. And so I knew that we'd get a lot of hits. But you can kind of see the different hits here. Again, if we were searching for a more specific address, just try here, 112. Just going to give a random address here. No surprise, again, it's showing up in a lot of these. Here's 1890. But here we see Daniel Hawkins, a laborer who is boarding. So he doesn't own the place, but he boards at 112 Randall. Quite a few other laborers, the Hawkins family, living there at 112 Randall. So again, it takes a little bit of getting used to and working with this. But these city directories are a wonderful way to start filling in these details about who were these people that were living inside this property over time and understand these different people and these families that lived there and their occupations. Did they fit the character of that neighborhood? Is it a blue collar neighborhood? Is it a white collar neighborhood? All of these different nuances that you can kind of start to understand better by being able to look at city directories. Now, I'll finally say one last thing about city directories. City directories actually present you with a lot of information. And when we look at this page right here, it says Daniel Hawkins, Lab, Boards 112 Randall. I have to admit that when I was an undergraduate, when I saw lab, I actually thought that meant laboratory. I was very confused. Of course, I know better today and understand that that's just a short abbreviation for a laborer. You can find that there's actually an abbreviations listing toward the beginning of many of these city directories. It might take a little bit of work to find those abbreviation listings, but once you can get to those listings, it really can help. Let's see here, indexed advertisements. Usually it's at the start of a section where you can kind of see that that list of abbreviations. Probably won't be able to find it in the time I have here, but you can find that information typically in all of these different city directories. All right, back to our presentation. So just kind of a clip here that I pulled from one of these. Maybe you can see this a little bit better on this screen right here. But name, occupation, business information, residency. From 1910 onward, as I said before, there's a street-by-street listing, kind of a helpful way to be able to navigate these. And then there are those abbreviations, which not only make it challenging to figure out the occupation, but sometimes just to do those basic searches. Another place to be able to go for information is the Register of Deeds office. Most communities have one. These Register of Deeds office are going to be one of the best ways to be able to determine who owned the house. Remember that the person living in a house is not always the same as the person who owns that house. And that's another piece of information that helps to build that story. So the legal documents at a Register of Deeds office, really just understanding the transfer of that property's deed over time, can help you get to that information. The Register of Deeds office here in Eau Claire is located at the Eau Claire County Courthouse. Right now, at least, I recommend reaching them by phone. Don't actually know if they have any hours that they're open to the public at this point in time, but that again may change in the weeks and months ahead. You may need to know the legal description of the property before visiting. I'll just add that the legal description is a piece of information that you can pull from the city assessor's online data. On that extended report that we looked at just a moment ago, the legal description typically appears at the bottom. Now, researching owners and occupants, there's a lot of more online genealogical resources that you can look at. Again, this information can contextualize those owners, those occupants, help us to better understand these people and better understand these houses. So Ancestry.com, there's a library edition available through the public library, again available here too. You may have your own membership to access that. You may be able to access it remotely using an L.E. Phillips Public Library card. You're going to be able to get census records, member supply data, school, city, church directories, land records. There's a lot of information there. I think the real gold mine are those census records. You really get to dig into who these people are and their families and who their neighbors are within these properties and residences. Free, but you may need to register, is the FamilySearch.org. If you can't access Ancestry right now, signing up for a free account with FamilySearch.org, you're going to get some of the same information that is referenced and available through Ancestry.com. Newspapers.com. Many public libraries also have access to newspaper databases. Newspaper databases are a great way to be able to search by both address and by name, just to be able to find what information might come up. Sometimes you can search by name and you get a little bit of kind of a social column where you understand so-and-so just traveled somewhere, or they have a visitor from out of state or out of country, and you really get a lot more information. This is where you start building more context and kind of filling in that story of a house and the people who lived in it. There's also another database available here at the UW Eau Claire ARC, that's Access Newspaper Archive. Similar coverage to newspapers.com, a little bit better local Eau Claire area coverage. You can see that newspapers.com, really great up to 1923, more sporadic after. But Access Newspaper Archive has some good coverage through the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. So another great source for that. And then online, more Chippewa Valley history resources are available through Ellie Phillips Memorial Public Library. That same history reference search that we found at the city directories, there's a lot of local histories and local information that can be searched and discovered there as well. You can even dig deeper, learn more about significant homeowners, neighborhood development, the unusual stories that maybe build and make your research more and more fascinating. You can contact the Chippewa Valley Museum. You can contact me with the UW-Eau Claire Area Research Center, Ellie Phillips Memorial Public Library. A lot of complementary resources that can assist with house history research. Thinking about photographs, here's an aerial from the collections of the Chippewa Valley Museum. If you can find an 1800s photograph of your house, that's just beautiful. It's amazing. It's wonderful kind of keepsake of that house and what it looked like. Also, there's subject files, property files that the Chippewa Valley Museum and the Public Library maintain. You might find information about significant people or properties through those subject and property files. And then the Wisconsin Historical Society. Sometimes you never know, but just searching for an address at wisconsinhistory.org, you can find that there's information on houses and individuals from Eau Claire and surrounding communities available from the Wisconsin Historical Society's Architecture and History Inventory. There's even more beyond that. There are tax records. Prior to 1905, the city assessor's dates of construction that are listed are a little bit questionable, but tax records that are available here at the UW-Eau Claire Area Research Center, the archives here, can really help you figure out an accurate date of construction by looking at how much a property was valued at for its annual tax bill. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of sources that you can contact. So definitely reach out to the Chippewa Valley Museum, the Public Library, reach out to me. We're here to help you dig into this, but house history research, it's like another type of genealogy. It's absolutely fascinating, and there's so many layers of information. It can be a fun journey, and we can learn a lot about our communities, about the people who have lived in our houses, and a little bit about ourselves along the way by being able to dig into this great research. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Take a look at that handout that will be available on the site. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.